Brandel, your reaction to this news and this merger today?
Well, like everyone else, when I first heard about it, I was completely shocked. I can't imagine that too many people outside of maybe the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people that were in the room that brought this merger to fruition would have known anything about it. After the shock sort of ebbed away, I was hugely disappointed. I think this is one of the saddest days in the history of professional golf. I do believe that the governing bodies, the entities, the professional entities have sacrificed their principles for profit. And then, of course, I tried to imagine what circumstances would have led to such a capitulation. I think there are 3 things likely that would have led to something like this, as Jody was just talking about previous. Intractable legal issues going on indefinitely into the future, no doubt with legal vulnerability on both sides of this issue. And the only people that stood to profit from that were the lawyers that were involved. And then, of course, I think, entanglement of the various business entities and sponsors that the PGA Tour has that have Saudi money, PIF money in them. And I think it became increasingly difficult for the PGA Tour to disentangle themselves from that scrutiny and from that criticism. And then, of course, the fact that there would be billions of dollars on the table for potentially the growth of the game globally at, I say, in the best case scenario. It could have been any one of those. It could have been a combination of all 3 of those. But at least in my view, those 3 issues were at play, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's what led to this merger.
Brandel, if you're one of the players sitting in the meeting at 4 o'clock Eastern time with PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan, how do you think you're going to feel when he addresses the room?
Hugely disappointed and let down by the leadership. Think about, and this was, of course, one of the first things I thought about was, I wonder what Tiger and Rory and several other players who would have turned down tens of, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to go to LIV, and they stood on principle, and they fought for the PGA Tour, and they fought for the betterment of the PGA Tour. And this just came out of nowhere. I would imagine this is going to be a very hard and long day for Jay Monahan.
Brandel, was this inevitable? And I don't mean this merger necessarily, but for the last couple of years, the great shots of the game have been in some ways overshadowed by the talk of money and leverage. In what ways, while some are saying this is, a good day for the game, could this be a hurtful day for the game in terms of the focus being so much on money as opposed to the greatness and the genius that we see inside the ropes?
Well, I think Jody Balsam, again, laid it out beautifully that this is sort of the inevitable conclusion of this antitrust legal matters. But just when looking at the game, I don't think any of us like to see the game fractured. And the divisive nature of the game over the last 2 or 3 years, again, it looked to be intractable, like there was no way out. So when you say, is this going to be for the good of the game, there are a lot of things. None of us really know the terms of this deal yet. All right, so that remains to be seen. At least in my view, this deal needs to meet 3 criteria for this deal, at least 3 criteria. In other words, with the PGA Tour, will its philanthropic and charitable aspect, that is just the lifeblood and the appeal of the game to so many sponsors, will that remain absolutely intact? Number 2, will the integrity of professional golf remain intact? The tournaments themselves, will they be sieged upon tournament after tournament by protesters who find this coupling very difficult to get their arms around, especially given the rhetoric of the commissioner over the last year or so? Will the integrity of the Ryder Cup and the President's Cup remain intact? Will the avenues to developing stars and will there be opportunity globally for places where golf hasn't really been touched? Will it continue to provide avenues to the game's players or to the PGA Tour and to the DP World Tour? So will the integrity of the game remain intact? And then, of course, the legacy of the players, past and present, 20 years down the road. Again, none of us know the terms of this deal. What will all of the tournaments that they be playing on sort of mitigate the legacy of the game's greats, both past and present? At least in my view, it has to meet 3 terms. But it raises so many more questions. Ultimately, will PIF be the owner of professional golf? That was the first question that popped into my mind. What are the avenues back for the players that have been playing the LIV Tour? You know, Phil Mickelson. Look, for all the beefs I've had with Phil Mickelson on Twitter and elsewhere, the game of golf does miss Phil. Phil was going to move into a spot of great leadership, of statesmanship in the game of golf. He was probably going to be the lead commentator at CBS. He was probably going to be a starter at the Masters. He was probably going to have a huge involvement in the Ryder Cup. I would say that the game does miss Phil. It does miss Brooks Koepka. It does miss Dustin Johnson. How will they be able to seamlessly come back into the game? And then, of course, the responses of Tiger and Rory and Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth and so many others who turned down the money because they said they wanted to be on the right side of issues, right side of history. So, you know, the terms of the deal, again, they're not known by any of us, but it has to meet certain criteria, at least in my view. And then, again, this raises so many questions that need to be answered in the coming days, weeks, and months.
Brandel, you and Phil obviously had been going back and forth on Twitter. Overall, when you look at the journey that Phil's been on the last year plus, do you think he feels vindication today?
I'm sure he does. You know, look, you know, when I've gone back and forth, and I've had numerous people ask me this about this today, about Phil and I, this isn't about Phil, and this isn't about me. It's not. This is about the growth of the game. This is about the game of golf. This is about the future of the game of golf. Will the game of golf still have its integrity? Will it still have this leadership that so many people point at as, you know, one of the most inspiring aspects of sport? This isn't about Phil. It's not about me. This is about the game of golf, the future of the game of golf, the legacy of the game of golf. This is so much bigger than any of us.
Brandel, when you talk about legacy and the future of the game of golf, when you look at what the PGA Tour had done the last 3 or 4 years. And you mentioned how interwoven business partners were in Saudi Arabia. You look this week with the Royal Bank of Canada, the RBC Canadian Open. They led the Aramco IPO in 2019. They're just on down the list of PGA Tour title sponsors that have a substantial book of business in Saudi Arabia. The PGA Tour used to operate a league in China, PGA Tour China. Why did it seem like LIV Golf had such a different tenor than what we had seen with previous business dealings?
I think because it came on the heels of the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, first and foremost. And then, of course, with the ongoing war and attacks in Yemen. And they're so upfront and forward. And I think increasingly consumers, and I'm not just talking about business consumers, I'm talking about consumers of sport, are more and more made aware of the entanglements of their businesses and the sports with money that you would say has human rights issues attached to it. So the more and more that all of us become more and more informed, a great many people are going to take issue with the source of the money. So on the one side, you have people that take issue with the source of the money. On the other side, you have people who don't take issue with the money, that they think that it just in general makes the sport more global and more interesting. And those two are at loggerheads. And that I think why this is, that's why I think this has become such a big issue, not just in golf, but in all of sport.
Brandel, in the last year or so, we've heard some very strong language from some of the leaders in the game. Mike Wan, USGA, Martin Slumbers of the RNA, even Augusta National. But none of those groups went as far as to out-and-out ban LIV golfers. In your mind, was this just kind of inevitable in terms of the company, the golf as a whole, no one stepping up outside of the PGA Tour to say, no, you don't get to have your cake and eat it too? I guess my question is there someone in your mind who is most culpable for what we've seen develop today?
Well, I think the different governing bodies and tournaments that you talked about would have talked to lawyers, and there would have been huge legal ramifications if they would have altered their participant criteria. I think that they literally listen to and look at algorithms that predict legal ramifications down the road, and that was informing their position. And again, the business entanglements that I have talked about previously. And if you dive into those business entanglements, they become very difficult to work through, try to understand, and ameliorate with your responses. And as it relates to the PGA Tour in China, and I've said this all along, I would have no problem, because I get asked this question, the hypothetical, all the time. If Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos would have started this tour, would I have had opposition with it? And I've always said, look, I don't think they would have done it because it didn't seem commercially viable. It didn't seem like a profitable operation the way LIV was going at it. But I would have no problem, in the same way I had no problem with golf's involvement in China. The PGA Tour was trying to grow the game in China. That is the PGA Tour's job. That is the governing body's job, is to grow the game around the world. It wasn't like China owned the PGA Tour within it. The PGA Tour and China were involved in literally trying to grow the game. I would have no problem, and who would, if they were trying to grow the game in far reaches and corners of the world where golf really wasn't played. And that includes Saudi Arabia. I've always felt like, though, that the athletes, not the business leaders, not the governing body leaders, I've always felt like it was the athletes themselves that had the power to say no to Saudi Arabia. Say, look, we will take your money, we'll play for you under these criteria. I need to see real evidence of reform, of human atrocities diminished, eliminated. Let's start with the male guardianship law that still permeates in Saudi Arabia, and go check by check by check and say, look, if I could see some real evidence of reform, absolutely. Why would we not want to participate and take our sport all around the globe? But I always felt like it was the athletes, and not so much the governing bodies, and not the business leaders, and not Jay Monahan, that had the full power in this issue. Maybe not even Yasser. Certainly Yasser's arguably the most important investor in the world, but it seemed to me that it was the athletes that had the upper hand here.
Why would the athletes, Brandel, have to take that stance instead of the corporate CEOs who had this large book of business with the PIF?
Well, again, because the corporate CEOs would have so many different business entanglements that would have been very difficult to work through. How would you sit down and say, look, I'm not going to accept LIV money, I'm not going to be a part of the PIF, when everybody can see your books and look down and say, well, look, you've got this investment, this investment, this investment, and this investment, and they all have Saudi money in them. Whereas the golfers do have autonomy. I don't know of anybody who has more autonomy in the world and more leverage than professional golfers. If you play for a team, you answer to ownership and to your coaches. Golfers don't play for a team. They play for themselves. They are the most autonomous athletes that I can think of in the world. So I always felt like, and perhaps it was a bit quixotic of me to think this, that the golfers were in the most powerful stance to push back to MBS on the heels of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and say, look, you want to come in and get involved in golf in a grassroots way, show us real evidence of reform. And I never really saw that. Maybe I heard a few golfers speak out about it, but I never really saw them galvanized in their opposition to LIV involvement, at least not on that front.
Partner, it's Rich. I'm out here at Hillcrest in Los Angeles. You were asked earlier if you could ask Jay Monahan a question, what would it be? Now that Yasser Al-Rumayyan has a seat at the table in professional golf, if you could, what would you ask him?
Well, first of all, look, again, I'll reiterate the question to Jay Monahan. What events transpired from last year to this year that led to a different position on the source of the money and the involvement with LIV? With Yasser, I would say, again, is this involvement with professional golf, with the PGA Tour, is it going to bring dishonor to the sport? Is it going to jeopardize the integrity of the sport going forward? And how can you square your involvement with an entity that is so involved with philanthropy and charity, while you have a country and the source of the funds that is the most misogynistic, is the most anti-Semitic, that doesn't have freedom of speech, that doesn't have freedom of expression, that doesn't have freedom of religion, that tries to silence, kill, and dismember members of the media who speak out in opposition to their government? What about the male guardianship law? Are any of these going to be removed, alleviated going forward? Because it's not just the money. Because I've always said they're trying to buy the success of the West and then pretend that they're surrogate to the success. The enormous success of the West, at least in my view, comes about because of the particular freedoms that are the foundation of the West. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, et cetera, et cetera. These bring about incredibly innovative ideas and business, and it leads to a freedom to pursue whatever your dreams are, and that includes sport. So the West has been incredibly successful in the world of sports. And now, PIF and Saudi Arabia want to jump in and they want to participate. But to what extent are they going to alleviate all of the issues that we've talked about that the West has such a problem with? And by the way, does PIF, do they want to own all of professional golf? Is that where we're going here? And if they do, does that mean then that the philanthropic foundation of the PGA Tour and the nonprofit aspect of the PGA Tour goes away? Because again, that is the lifeblood of professional golf. And it's not just about buying stars. It's about developing stars. It's about providing avenues to the game of golf. If you're just hell-bent on buying every single star that pops up and not about providing avenues to the game of golf and making sure that the game of golf reaches all the corners of the world and provides all these avenues of players of diverse backgrounds, of inclusive backgrounds. If that's what golf is going to be, I think it will be to the detriment of the game.
Brandel, if Phil Mickelson and others take a victory lap and they say that you lost because you've been, I think, bravely outspoken on this in a way that, say for Eamon Lynch, in a way that no one else has, but if they take a victory lap and come for you and say that you lost, your response would be what?
That this is not about me, Rich, and it's not about them. They can gloat if they want to, but this is not about them. And this is not about me. Again, this is much, much bigger than any of us. This is about the future of the game. This is about the game being fragmented. It is the love of this game that unifies all of us. It is the future of this game and the hope for a better future in this game that unifies all of us. So my concern is not about what Phil or Brooks, whether they're going to gloat or not. My concern is about, will this lead to the betterment of the game? And that raises a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days, certainly next week and on into the future. A lot of questions and a lot of issues. Again, the terms of this deal remain to be seen. We'll learn more, no doubt, about the terms of this deal over the coming days and the coming weeks. But my concern is not about what Phil or Brooks or DJ think about my past comments. Everybody knows where I stand on this. My feelings about that remain exactly the same. But this is much bigger than Brooks or DJ and their gloating, if they choose to gloat. Or much bigger than, it's not about me. It's about the growth of the game.
What would have to happen, Brandel, for you to feel comfortable and in good conscience continue to do what I know you love to do? Just talk about the game of golf. What would the Saudis or the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, what would they have to do to get you to a point where you're comfortable with all of it?
Look, I said this deal, at least in my view, needs to meet three specific criteria. The philanthropic aspect of the PGA Tour needs to remain intact. And then, of course, that the integrity of tournaments remains intact and is protected. Will the terms of this deal lead to professional golf and tournaments? And by the way, the sponsors of those tournaments besieging the PGA Tour with requests to disentangle themselves from professional golf and besieging these events with protests at people taking issue with the entanglement with Saudi Arabia, with PIF. How is the integrity of the game going forward going to be protected? And then, of course, will the legacy of past players and present players be protected such that maybe if PIF buys professional golf, and it looks to me like that might be what could happen. Will the past PGA Tour events and the legacies of the greatest players and LPGA players, will they no longer be relevant 10, 20 years from now? So those are three different issues. As it relates to me talking about golf, I continue to love the game of golf. I love what I do. I love where I get to work. My job is to cover golf, to analyze the game. I've said for the longest time that I look forward to getting back to talking about golf, golf swings, competition, just the game, and not about the politics around the game. So I don't work for the PGA Tour. My job is to analyze the golf. And Rich, I look forward to getting back to talking about golf and not about these political and fragmenting issues in the game of golf.
Brandel, you cover the game of golf with great passion. You also are a PGA Tour winner, have been a PGA Tour member. Have you heard from anyone from the PGA Tour today? I
haven't been able to get back to them. I'm sure your phone is the same. This is a big day, and in my view, a very sad day in the professional game. But my phone has been blowing up, I'm sure, like everybody's in the game, and certainly in the media that cover this game. But I do look forward to talking to various people at the PGA Tour and trying to find out more, as all of us will, trying to find out more the ramifications of this deal and how it came about.